Alright, Shalom, Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rechak Wadash. Double honors to the elder apostles, the elder bishops, the elders, the great millstone, who rule very well, very beautifully. Double salutations unto the Akim and her pushing this gospel in truth and in sincerity to the best of their ability, given to them by Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai. Peace, blessings, and salutations be unto the elect scattered abroad. May the election of Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shalom, when they fall upon your houses. This is Brother Quanawath. Come back at you, Lord will, with edifying lesson through the spirit and power of Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shalom, will. It is edifying, Lord will. It is straight to the point. And I was at camp earlier, man, and just listening to the bros go in. You know, and one of the brothers, I think it was the brother Yuwana, man, you know, ultimately was speaking about, because, you know, they were speaking about, these different camps, you know, ultimately, I think it was BOW or something like that, you know, I can't remember the dude's name that's head over that camp. You know, you're talking about, you know, ultimately, you know, that these different camps need to ultimately come together, and there needs to stop being a separation, which we've been hearing for, you know, for years, right? You had the whole FOPI and ITR where Israel tried to refine, and they came in, you know what I mean, and all of a sudden these camps want to get together and whatnot, and, you know, need to stop the hate and so on. And so we've heard this shit time and time again, you know. But the scriptures say, what hath righteousness with unrighteousness, man? You know what I mean? You got these people that got wayward ass doctrines, you know, different doctrines, and they ultimately trying to come together, right? And ultimately that's not true unity. Right, because as it says right here in Psalms 133 and verse 1, it says a song of degrees of David, right? It says, behold, how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity, man. Right, and when you go back to that word unity, right, it ultimately goes back to the word agreement, man. And these guys are not in agreement, you know, which is why, again, with that whole, getting the camps together, you know, and whatnot, and so on and so on. That's all bullshit, man. You know, we're not trying to, you know, be around, right, these niggas that are in the world, man, like, you know, Hakah and Hassad from Genesis, and Alazar, and, you know, all these different heads, you know, Johanna, Captain Tazariak, you know what I mean, or Tazariak, he ain't a captain, you know, but nonetheless, right, these different leaders of these different camps, or even these, you know, lower level, you know, members of these different camps that, you know, ultimately follow that doctrine. We ain't trying to be with y'all, man. Right? We're trying to be like, you know, we're trying to be around like-minded men, right? Those men, right, that ultimately believe in the same doctrine, right? That we believe in, man. You know, which you're gonna find that here at what? Great Millstone, man. Beginning with our apostles on down, right? We cherish, right, the brotherhood, man. We cherish, you know, that unity, that agreement, you know, which is why the brotherhood is so important, man. You know, because it ultimately allows for growth. It allows for, you know, as the scriptures say, right, iron sharpeneth iron. You know, it allows for brothers to, you know, ultimately keep brothers in check, and allows for brothers to ultimately, you know, provoke one another unto good works, man. You know, this is why the body, right, is so important within this ministry, you know. But I do want to jump to this in Ecclesiastes chapter 4. And what is that, verse 8? Right? It says there is one alone, right? And you do have, you know, within the body, man, you do have members, right, that are ultimately, you know, by themselves, right? You got the Virgin Island brother, man, right? That brother is out there by himself, right? And that's a strong brother through the spirit, man, because it takes a lot to go out there by yourself, right? And to, you know, ultimately, you know, preach this word, preach this truth. You know, it takes a very strong spirit, right, for you to ultimately do that, man. You know, but in reality, he's not alone, man. Right? He's got the rest of the body, right? He's got, you know, he's in communication with the, you know, the other brothers and elders and whatnot, man. You know, again, that's that brotherhood, right? And these are like-minded men, right, that he's able to, you know, ultimately conversate with, and, you know, speak through the spirit with, right? It says, there is one alone, and there is not a second. Yea, he hath neither child nor brother, yet is there no end of all his labor. Neither is his eye satisfied with riches, neither saith he, for whom do I labor and bereave my soul of good? This is also vanity, yea, it is a sore travail. So that loner spirit, right, that being alone, hey, that shit's for the birds, man. You know? You don't want to be in that loner spirit. You shouldn't want to be alone, you know? Because it's ultimately, it's hard. It's very hard. You know, you should want to be, around those that are like-minded, right? In 2 Ezra, I think it's the 8th chapter, right? Seek out the glory, right, of such as be like thee. Roughly paraphrasing, man. So we're supposed to ultimately, matter of fact, let me grab that. 2 Ezra 8, I think it's like 50. Right. Right here, 2 Ezra 8 and verse 51, it says, but understand thou for thyself and seek out the glory for such as be like thee. Right? You want to be around like-minded men, right? Those who are like you, man. Right? You don't want to be around these fucking, bug outs in the world, man, because they'll ultimately try to persuade you, right, to believe something else, man, or to stray away from, your belief, or stray away from the doctrine, believe in their doctrine or whatnot, man. You don't want to be around these niggas, man. Again, you want to be around those who are like-minded, that loner spirit, that being by yourself spirit, that shit's again for the birds, man. But let's get back to it in Ecclesiastes, and this is not gonna be a long lesson, man. Ecclesiastes 4 and verse 9, it says 2 are better than 1, and we've been hearing this, in the when we're in the world for so long, right? 2 heads are better than 1, right? And well, guess what? It's scriptural, right? It says 2 are better than 1 because they have a good reward for their labor. That's right, man. Right? It says, for if they fall, the one will lift up his fellow, right? Meaning if, you ultimately, go off or do whatnot, hey, well, what's going to happen, man? That man, right, is ultimately going to correct you. He's going to chastise you through the spirit, right? And ultimately bring you back, to that path, right? And I got this right here just to back that up. And this is James 5 and 19 and 20 in the NLT, right? It says, restore wandering believers, right? It says, my dear brothers and sisters, if someone among you wanders away from the truth and is brought back, right, you ultimately, you fall off, you do some, or not fall off, but you ultimately, you commit sin, you know what I mean, or you do something that, you're not supposed to or whatnot. Hey, well, what's going to happen? Again, that person that you're with is supposed to ultimately what? Be that brother's keeper, man, and to, chastise you, correct you, right, through the spirit, right, so that way you can ultimately what? Repent, man. And turn back to Yahweh Shemel Shai, right? It says what? It says that you can be sure that whoever brings the sinner back will save that person from death, right? So that brother's ultimately saving you, man, right? Through the spirit, right? By chastising you, right? Rebuking you, right? Showing you where you went off, right? And ultimately telling you to repent, right? It says, you can be sure that whoever brings the sinner back will save that person from death. It says, and bring about the forgiveness of sins, man. So it's ultimately it's a blessing, right? Not only unto you, right, but unto that person who again, if you do something you're not supposed to, and that brother ultimately chastises you, again, it's not only a blessing unto you, right? And it shows that brother actually cares about you, but it's a blessing unto that brother as well. Again, showing you, right, the importance of the brotherhood and being around the brothers, man. That's why Apostle Paul said, Hebrews 13 and 1, right? Let brotherly love continue, man. Right? Because it's very important. The brotherhood is very important. So let's get back to it. It says, verse 10 again, for if they fall, the one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him that is alone when he falleth, for he hath not another to help him up. That's right, man. You're alone. Right? It says again, if 2 lie together, they can have heat, but how can one be warm alone? And if one prevail against him, 2 shall withstand him, and a 3-fold cord is not easily broken, man. So the brotherhood is very important, man. Right? And the more the merrier. That's why you see majority of these camps out here, within Great Millstone, right, or have multiple brothers, man. And those are strong camps, like Chicago camp, right? The Dallas, the Texas camps, right? Houston, Dallas, the New York camp, right, with the Elder Apostles, right? Majority of these camps have, a large number of brothers, man. Even if they have 3 or 4 brothers, that's still a strong camp through the Spirit, man. Because that's ultimately, how it's supposed to be, man. Again, you do have those brothers that are, by themselves, right? Few and far between. Right? Again, case in point, the Virgin Island brother, man. But even that brother's not alone, right? Even that brother's not alone through the Spirit. So, hey, the brotherhood is very important, man, right? 2 are better than 1, But that's all I got, man. Just wanted to ultimately touch on that point, right? A point that was brought out through the Spirit, man, at the camp, But Lord will is edifying. Lord will straight to the point. I want to give all praise, honor, glory to Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Bahashim, Rachak, Wadash, double honor, said the elder apostles, the elder bishops, the elders of Great Millstone. Until next time, I say shalom.